What's up, Ego Hackers? Welcome to the C.S. Joseph podcast. I am your host, C.S. Joseph. This is season 35, episode 1. What are the God functions? Oh, holy smokes. C.S. Joseph doing seasonal content on YouTube and on the podcast again? Yeah, it's been a long time coming. Besides, I decided to fulfill a promise that I made to this audience many years ago. And that promise was that I would, in effect, start giving explanation as to what exactly are the God functions. And I hinted at them in a couple of videos, like 2.5 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, as we've just passed are passing our 5-year anniversary of the channel, and which is pretty exciting if you think about it. But yeah, the God functions. It's been a long time coming. We had to flesh out all of the content relating to the 4 temples and the temple wheels before we got to this point. But knowledge of the God functions is so important and so radical when it comes to Jungian analytical psychology, 4 sides dynamics, which is basically 4 sides of the mind interpretation of Jungian analytical psychology. Also, anything related to Myers-Briggs type indicator, as we still use their four lettering system, which, yeah, it's inaccurate. Yes, Jared Vaughn, I know it's inaccurate. Yes, I know you would prefer us changing it because it's not really correct, but we use it for SEO and people Googling this stuff, and that's why I do it. So, not going to change it. Makes it easier for people to find us on YouTube or on the podcast. So, anyway, that's what I do, and that's how I'm going to roll. So yeah, outdoor chase, walking around. It's been too long, folks. It's been very long since I've done this, but getting back into the swing of things and having Chris Taylor's support with the Acolyte questions, because we have a very large volume of Acolyte questions coming in every month, and to get his assistance has been fantastic. I meet with him on a weekly basis. We discuss the questions, we discuss the answers for the questions, and then we assign them between each other, and then we get them filmed and distributed out to all of you folks. So special thanks to the Acolyte members who pay for that service and keep the lights on and keep this business running, and also all of the families involved with running this organization fed. So special thanks to all the Acolytes out there for being loyal and sticking around with us all the way through. So yeah, and because of their generous financial contributions, same with the Journeyman members, and you can become a Journeyman member at csjoseph.ly/members, we felt that it was finally time to start reintroducing new seasons to YouTube and the podcast as well. And for this particular case, we are going to be discussing the God functions, which is absolutely fascinating. So, introduction to the God functions, or what are the God functions, which is the name of this particular playlist of season 35, but it is also, this is the introduction episode before you go into super deep as to what exactly the God functions are, at least from a personality type perspective and how they affect the personality types. But let's actually discuss first where the God functions come from. And they come from our understanding of the 4 temples. So every single person, regardless of type, belongs to one of the 4 temples. There is the soul temple, which is the ego of humanity, the heart temple, which is the unconscious of humanity, the mind temple, which is the subconscious of humanity, and the body temple, which is the superego of humanity from a macro level, a macro psychological perspective, right? So from this point of view, this macro psychological perspective, everyone belongs to these temples. The soul temple is about character. It's also about being desirable. The heart temple is all about reaching acceptance, and it's also about personal freedom and passion. And then its main element is fire. Going back to the soul temple, its main element is water. And then the mind temple, it's all about performance. It's also all about the truth, and its main element is wind. And then you have the body temple with its main element as the earth, and it is most concerned about what is left behind. It's concerned about legacy and everything thereof, which is absolutely also achievement, legacy of achievement, basically. So these are the 4 temples, and how do you know which temple you are in? Well, it's very simple. So Soul Temple people all have ESTP, ENFP, ISTJ, and INFJ in their heads, as they make up the 4 sides of the mind. I am an ENTP, and thus I belong to the Heart Temple, because ENTP ego, my shadow is an INTJ, my subconscious is an ISFJ, and my superego is an ESFP. And any one of those 4 types have all of the other 3 types associated with that within their temple, and that makes up the Heart Temple. And then also the mind temple are ESTJs, INFPs, ISTPs, and ENFJs. And then we have the body temple, which are ENTJs, ISFPs, INTPs, and ESFJs. They make up the body temple. And if you just look at which type is a person's ego, that is basically their type. And then, for their ego, that's what we assign as, their 4 letters, basically. But then you look at their shadow, you look at their unconscious, look at their superego, and they all follow the same type of sequence. All of those 4 types are representative of one single temple, which means any one human being represents, basically, an aspect of the 4 temples, but ultimately one of the 4 temples at any given time. And that's where we determine that. The thing is, though, is that where the God functions come into play is that the God functions ultimately are what each of the 4 temples worship or focus on, or are putting all of their energy, their life, their investment into. It is insanely important to them. It's kind of like, when you actually look at the word worship and how it's actually defined, it really is about, what someone puts their attention towards the most, or what they put their attention towards. And that's basically a real practical definition of what the concept of worship means. And, when you go into a temple, that's usually because they're worshiping something or putting all of their collective attention onto something. And that's what each of the 4 temples are doing. And each of us belong to one of the 4 temples. So I'm part of the Heart Temple. So my Heart Temple is focusing specifically on 2 God functions. And those God functions is introverted intuition and extroverted feeling, right? Even though I'm not an introverted intuitive myself. I have introverted intuition nemesis, but that's part of my unconscious. It is not part of my ego. So I'm technically not an introverted intuitive by that definition. I am an introverted sensor. However, just because I'm an introverted sensor does not mean that introverted intuition has any less significance on my life. It's so funny because, even from my perspective, I had mistyped myself for many, many years. I started learning Myers-Briggs type indicator and Jungian analytical psychology when I was 21, basically is when I started. And I've been involved in the science and being a pioneer in the science for about 15 years. I got 15 years of experience that I've been doing this, and I got into it in an effort to save my marriage. But when that didn't really work out, but at least I gained a skill along the way. But the point is that I would mistype as INTJ specifically because I really, really identified with the questions on these MBTI tests relating to personal freedom, for example, relating to introverted intuition. I'd always click yes, or oh yeah, I'm all into that and whatnot. but then I would end up being mistyped. I would be mistyped as an INTJ, when in reality I was actually an ENTP. And the reason why is because of the God function and the God functions and their influence on my life as a heart temple, a member of the heart temple, basically. So the passion that INTJs had, I would claim that passion basically on the MBTI test, and the MBTI test would just say, oh, well, you're an INTJ, when that's not actually the case. God functions basically end up oftentimes muddying the waters when it comes to people typing themselves, and it can make it really, really difficult for people to type themselves, which, I mean, it's understandable, and it's also really, really frustrating, like very frustrating. So that's why that's just one of the reasons why it's so important to understand what the God functions are and how they actually influence and impact every single person, as much as it does so for each of the 16 types, as well as all of their different octagram subvariants. And there is a lot of octagram subvariants that they have to basically pay attention to and be aware of. It really makes the system of four-sides dynamics and ultimately Jungian analytical psychology an extremely complex system to understand. It's so funny when I often am talking to ESTPs or ESFPs, like, oh man, you're putting me in a box, you're taking away my freedom, and I fear your freedom, And I'm just like, no, this system is so complex that it's not actually putting you in a box. And then certain aspects of this science is variable, right? But it is variable within the confines of the system itself. So you only have a certain amount of potential to be variable, basically, within, which type you are, and that's based on your octagram, based on your nurture. Because human nurture will adjust, the variant as to which you are in terms of your nature, because nurture impacts and adjusts nature over time, right? So you may have the base nature being an ESTP or an ESFP, but your octagram, also known as your nurture, will adjust it from there. However, before your nature is even determined, well, what is determining nature? Well, we learned that recently, especially in our recent Cutting Edge episode. It was a season 18 episode behind the paywall at csjoseph.life/members. And for the journeyman folks, we learned about input, process, output, feedback. And the output is actually our nature. That is our type. But the feedback is actually our octagram, the nurture. But what is the process? Well, the process really is the four temples and ultimately the God functions. That's the process. And the input is something called the Rosetta Stone, or at least our interpretation of cognitive origins. If you want to learn more about that, then you'll have to get the Ego Hacking by Text masterclass at egohackingbytext.com. And you have to already own the course in order to be able to get the masterclass. It's a prerequisite. But if you do already own the course, you can go to csjoseph.life or offers.csjoseph.life/EBT-masterclass. And it'll take you to the sales page so you can get the masterclass, which it is life-changing. And understanding how cognitive origins work fundamentally from the perspective of what we are calling the Rosetta Stone, and understanding production and consumption of cognitive origins and the new level of ego hacking that provides, it's a big, serious deal. And that's the input. But this particular season, season 35, is focusing on the process. Input, process, output, feedback. Everything in the universe follows that loop, basically. And we are discussing in season 35 the God functions, also known as the process from which our cognition follows in order to create our nature, which is the output. Nature being the 16 personality types, right? So from that point of view, the God functions basically are ultimately the focus of attention of each of the four temples, right? And it's very, very fascinating how that works out, right? So the God functions basically for the soul temple are extrovert intuition and introverted feeling. Extrovert intuition is all about wanting to be wanted. It's all about having a better future for everybody. It's all about having vision. It's about being as desirable as possible and making yourself as desirable as possible. And introverted feeling is also their God function, which means they are extremely focused on character and being the best version of themselves, ultimately ideal versions of themselves whenever possible, right? And then you have the heart temple and its introverted intuition, all about personal freedom and passion and what they want to do, where they're going, where their own futures will take them. That's and their passions thereof. And then their other God function is extroverted feeling. This is why members of the heart temple crave acceptance, very much crave acceptance, and spend a lot of time in their life working hard to make themselves as acceptable as possible. Then you have the mind temple, which is introverted thinking, constantly looking for the facts, constantly looking for the truth. And extroverted sensing, always trying to optimize their own personal performance as well as the performance of others. This is what makes the mind temple such a great teacher, right? That's why the mind temple cares about learning and education, right? And as much as the heart temple cares so much about passion, and the soul temple cares so much about character, right? And, from the soul temple's perspective, you can't even become someone of great character unless you're desirable, in as much as you having the substance necessary, the firmament necessary to actually be a person of great character, right? That's what that's all about. So from beyond that, we also have the body temple, which is introverted sensing is one of their God functions. Introverted sensing is concerned about what is left behind. It is concerned about the grand experience and my own experience. What can I explore? They're all about exploration. They're all about experiencing so much more. And then extroverted thinking, which represents achievement. And even something that is explored or exploring the unknown is in its own right a big, grand achievement. This is why Elon Musk is trying to get to Mars, for example. And that is his ambition, and that is what he is spending his life doing, trying to get to Mars and explore it with his cognitive origin of discovery, given that he is an INTP, right? So the God functions, these God functions end up dominating each of the four temples. So the four types that are attached to each of the four temples, 4 times 4 is 16, all ultimately serve at the feet of the God functions that rule over, if not oversee, or are the focus of attention or the focus of worship by the members of each of the 4 temples. And that's ultimately what God functions ultimately are. And God functions have a ton of uses. They even provide an entirely new level of ego hacking that people are not even really aware of, which is very, very fascinating. It's kind of like how an ESTP, even though they have extrovert intuition demon, they really, really care about being wanted and about being chosen and about being included. They really care about it. And oftentimes, if they don't have that, they're just going to shut down. And that's because of their God functions, for example. So anyway, folks, that's it for this introduction for Season 35. I look forward to seeing you in the very near future for all of these episodes for Season 35. So thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys on the next one.